Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. So, I realized that recently I haven't been saying leave a like and subscribe, but I'd really appreciate it if you do, because it gets me one step closer to YouTube rank, even though that's very far away. So basically, what I've been planning out right now is a three-part series, in which this is the first video about factions. And if factions basically is this mode where you work together as a team, or by yourself if you want, and your goal is to create bases, hoard as much loot as you can, and raid other bases to become the richest faction on the server. So, this is where it ties in. Um, if you haven't seen my previous video about MafiaCraft, I suggest you really do. The link is down in the description. Okay, so basically, once MafiaCraft had shut down, I moved to this server called Redstone Minecraft. I joined on it and played for a bit, but not that much. And this was my first time I really started to become active. Redstone Minecraft had three main modes: creative, towny, and factions. But the most popular mode in that server was factions. So, on June 2016, the server reset, the faction server, which meant that everyone started completely naked or with a couple kits, and everyone was basically on equal ground. And that meant that I could join a faction and I could start playing factions for the first time. So, I actually started playing factions a bit after the reset. So, when it reset in June 2016, MafiaCraft was still in its process of dying, so I actually still was playing on it. However, it shut down around in July or like something in 2015, 2016, and by August, I had started to play on Redstone Minecraft. So, there was two main factions that I remember, and they were called Tranquil and 420. Tranquil inspires the name of this video, Tranquility. So, 420 was a very selective faction. There was only like 3 or 4 people, and they all had to be like vetted, and they were all very trusted by the faction leader, whose name was Whiffy. And basically, Tranquil was a much more open faction. There were 7 to 8 people. They were all still relatively known players. However, there were a couple new ones. And I decided that I wanted to join Tranquil. So, I had to go through this like vetting process in which I answered a couple questions and did some stuff, but in the end they let me in as an engineer. That basically meant I was the one who was building redstone TNT cannons and doing those things like farms around the base. Now, it might seem like that's a really boring job, but honestly, I was just really, really excited that I was in the faction in the first place. There was a lot of other minor factions, like maybe like 6 or 7, with only like a couple members, and they weren't really rich at all. But basically, there was an economy, and with like a huge shop, there was like hundreds and hundreds of items, and there was one thing that was really coveted, which was these things called iron golem spawners. So you might notice them from Skyblock. They were also a very important thing in factions, and the reason they were really important is because if you had like an iron golem farm, you could literally just keep generating iron over and over again, and just get tons of money. They were 2 million a piece, which I remember, and that was super expensive at the time. 420 was a lot richer than Tranquil or us in general, mainly because their players they played a lot. Like they were always on grinding 7 to 8 hours a day, and we never learned where their base was. On the other hand, our base was a lot more different. There was multiple bases because the faction leader Ahmad1257 didn't really trust us because and I don't blame him for that because there was a lot of randoms in the faction. So, and I was led into the member base. The member base had some blaze spawners, which were a lot cheaper at like 30,000 coins each, and they would generate blaze rods, which you could also sell at the shop. However, all the iron golem spawners were reserved for the owners and the moderators who would actually use them. And basically, you had to gain trust if you wanted to rise in the ranks of Tranquil. Now, the largest problem was that I was a new player in factions, and therefore I didn't really know about some basic things. So I fell victim to one of the most classic blunders in the book. Basically, the 420 owner, Whiffy, reached out to me around a month after I joined Tranquil, saying that if I betrayed their base, if I betrayed my base to the to the 420 owners, I could join 420. I was obviously really delighted at this. 420 was like the top of the top faction, and they were really selected, so I was obviously really excited to join. So I gave out the base coordinates and I teleported them to my base. So then they invited me to the faction. So I was like, yes, I got into the faction. And so then I go to the faction home, but then they kick me from the faction and they subsequently kill me. So I'm like really mad. I'm like, what the heck? Why would you kill me and kick me from the faction? And they said that I just incited them for free. And inciting is basically this thing where one of the faction members TPs an enemy faction into their base, and that's what I'd basically done. I mean, I'd expected to get like what they promised, but they didn't. And I feel like that was my first experience with like getting tricked and trolled in factions. Now, a couple days after I had incited the faction owner, Ahmad1257, messaged me, and he was like really mad. He called me a lot of names like punk, stupid, and all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, I couldn't really say much because I had incited him. However, the faction soon collapsed because Ahmad became inactive. But one of the moderators of that, called Mad Hatter's girl, actually still trusted me even after I'd incited their faction. I remember she said like, "Oh, she still trusts me," and she knew I just fell victim to the blunder. So we started this new faction called Prosperity. It was basically just a successor to Tranquil, and it had most of the members from Tranquil. And we were basically co-owners. Each one of us had leadership for 1 week. And coincidentally, this is when 420 started to collapse. So, as we might have previously talked about, 420 was like the strongest faction. I'm sure they had tens of millions in valuable belongings. However, the problem was that Whiffy, the owner, actually kicked one of his members from the faction. And since there was only like 3 to 4 people, even losing one member was super vital, and it caused a lot of problems. And soon, many of them fell inactive, and like their factions just started collapsing from the inside out. So we took advantage of this, and we raided their base, which we found on the top of the Nether in the Bedrock area. And holy crap, they actually had tens of millions, and Prosperity, my faction, literally became the richest of the richest by just that one raid. So by this time, it was about December to November, which meant that activity was soon going to go up. Since a lot of people at school, the months between the times where there weren't breaks was usually not so active, with only people usually coming on the weekends. And when it became December, break started, and suddenly there was like an influx of players. There was like 15 to 16 players on it each time, and that may seem like a little, but in the factions world, especially with the world border set to a pretty small amount, it was pretty large. And this is when my faction Prosperity collapsed. We were inside it, ironically, and we'd lost a lot of things. I was able to salvage my Iron Golem spawners and a couple things, but mostly it collapsed. And out of all the factions that had collapsed, there was one person, ZizzleWap10, who started a new faction called Kapow, and that really changed everything. Okay, now, so I have like a lot of things to say, but I don't want this video to become like 25 minutes, which is why I'm going to be splitting this up into 3 parts. But basically, if you didn't already see, factions rise and fall really quickly, like in less than the span of a month or two, and that's really instrumental in this series. So, anyway, thank you for watching this video, and keep your eyes out for the next one, which I'll be posting in a couple days to a week. See you guys.